Cute is this big guy right underneath us. He is the biggest mammoth that we've found here so far because he is the only adult male that we've uncovered. Now, as I mentioned outside, adult males like this would not have been allowed to travel in nursery herds like the one we found here. If they were anything like our elephants today, these males would have gotten kicked out when they were anywhere from 13 to 15 years old, because that's when they would start going through puberty. They would start picking fights over mates. And oftentimes our elephants today, when they do start picking fights, they will even start trying to kill the other juveniles because they see the other juvenile males as threats to their mating pool. Nature is dark sometimes, so yeah. So this big guy, he definitely would not have been traveling with a nursery herd of his own. He's clearly an adult. By the size of his teeth, it looks like he was in his mid to late 40s, which is actually really old for a male. Most males, because of that aggressive lifestyle that they live, they usually only live about 30 to 45 years. So he was doing pretty well for himself before he ended up here. Now we can see he is from a completely different layer of dirt from that nursery herd. So he's sitting about 2.5 to 3 feet higher in the dirt. This layer that he's in has been dated to about 51,000 years old. So he was definitely not with that nursery herd. He just happened to die on top of them 14,000 years later. Okay? So once again, something pretty attractive about this area, bringing them back over and over and over again. Now with him, we do have a slight clue in why he might have died here when he did. I mentioned he was fairly older than the average male mammoth. Well, most of the time these males died off around age 30 to 35 because they were aggressive. They were picking fights with other males. And if you were picking fights every single day of your life, eventually you're gonna pick a fight that you simply can't win. And around age 30 is when their bodies would naturally start to slow down a little bit. It comes for us all, right? We even see in his joints, he had been developing arthritis. Arthritis actually leaves a special texture on the bone itself. So he was definitely slowing down. And we see a recent fighting injury on him. So on his left side here, just to get you all oriented, this is his spine, his pelvis, his right shoulder blade, and his skull. So these on either side of him are his ribs. Now this rib in particular has a crack about halfway down. That crack, if you look at his mural here, is located right about here. That is the same spot where we find fighting injuries on all our modern male elephants. Because when they fight, they butt heads and they scoop their tusks underneath the armpits of their opponent. And sometimes that scooping motion breaks those ribs. Although 9 times out of 10, that is not a fatal injury. It's just a very painful one for anybody who's broken ribs before you can probably understand. So we find a lot of broken ribs right around here. Now we can tell with him, this was not a fatal injury at the time for him either, because there is a callus around that crack where it had been repairing for about a year before he ended up dying. So why am I bringing this up when we're discussing cause of death? Well, it did not heal well. Around that crack, we see a bulge in this bone about the size of a softball. That is not the way a healthy bone should heal. This is what happens when a bone gets infected. The bone will actually start forming a bubble around the infection to keep it from spreading to the rest of the body and making the animal sick. Now, in some cases, this can be effective and he can go on and live for a few more years, although he's going to be in pain on the left side for the rest of his life. In his case, by the time he reached here, there is a porous texture along that swollen area that tells us the bacteria ate its way straight through the bone. Really nasty. He would have been very sick and a lot of pain, very, very weak. And this may have ended up killing him in the end. What we can see is he is laying in a very peculiar position on his belly. So the back part of his spine here, these pointy bits, the spinous processes, are sticking straight up towards the sky. That tells us he's laying flat on his belly, not a natural way for an elephant to lay. It puts too much pressure on their vital organs. Especially with his legs splayed out at all these wonky angles, and yes, wonky is a scientific term for me. He is not laying in a comfortable position. We call this a sudden death position, which truly looks like he just collapsed. So Collapsing like this could be from something like exhaustion. It could be from something like a blood clot from an infection causing a stroke or a heart attack, something of that nature. Now, this is the only mark that we see on this skeleton that even comes close to explaining why he died here. However, it is really fun, and by fun I mean kind of frustrating for people who like solid answers like myself, that even with something like this, it's not enough for us to firmly say, yes, this is what's different. But it is our best idea right now. Okay? Now, as for the nursery bird, 15 or 14,000 years before him, we have even less of an idea as to what killed him. When Baylor first came in and they were excavating this site, they were working with the hypothesis that our mammoths died in a flash flood. That's certainly what our mural off to the left shows. All of this because we are in what was historically a floodplain between the Brazos and Bosque Rivers. We're in a low spot. And they noticed right on top of our nursery bird, this thin, dark layer of soil. We call it alluvium. It's the type of soil that you usually find at the bottom of water sources. And you'll also find it in long, thin layers when those water sources have flooded their banks and brought that alluvium into a new area. So when Baylor saw this layer of alluvium right on top of our nursery bird, they thought it was way too much of a coincidence and that had to be their cause of death. However, as we've had more time to examine those bones, we've started to notice a lot more teeth marks. Now the problem with scavenging marks, so all of these teeth marks were made after the animal's time of death. So not killed by these animals, but chewed on them after they were already dead. So the problem with scavenging marks and flash flooding is animals that are killed in flash floods, they're usually buried pretty instantly in all that alluvium after time of death. Scavengers don't have time to come chew on their bones before they're buried. So this means they were not buried rapidly like we originally thought. In fact, a lot of the scavenging marks that we're seeing were made by rodents. And rodents are not interested in, I'm sorry, this might be a little gross, wet, fleshy things. They're interested in dry, bony things, the minerals they can get from the bone. And depending on weather conditions, with animals of this size, it might have taken 2 or 3 years before they were defleshed enough for rodents to be interested in them at all. So this tells us they were sitting exposed for quite a while. So this brings us back to square one, trying to figure out what happened to this bird.